Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, getting you set for week 6 of college football. We bring in Steve Merrill, as we always do, at 11:45 Eastern time for the live stream and the live chat each Friday. So please join us. Steve joins us from Pro Sports Info. So check out the site. He has some tremendous insight and information into the Vegas lines, not just for college football, but across the board, pro football, college basketball, Major League Baseball, NBA. There you go. Steve, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, doing well.
So for another week, Thursday night was pretty close to the line when it comes to the NFL game. Finally, I finished on the right side of the ledger with taking New England to cover at home, but still Vegas was within about 3 to 3.5 points.
Yeah, another home team that wins and another home team that covers. We had the Patriots as well for my clients. And keep in mind, last week the Rams won, but it landed right on the number at 7. But every home team has won this year, and I believe no road team has covered. We just had that one push. And it's a serious disadvantage for these road teams having to travel and prep on just 3 days rest because they lose that day with the travel factor. I thought New England's win over Miami was a telltale game, probably the most important NFL game of the season, because I didn't have anything in that game last week, but I was really keeping a close eye on it because Brady had only lost 3 games once ever, and that was in 2002. Patriots not only win, but they rout them. Looks like they're back, and it looks like New England might be the team to beat again in the AFC.
In looking at week 5 of college football, was there anything that stood out to you once all the results came in regards to a surprise for you, or maybe something where Vegas and the public was headed one way and you had a hunch and the numbers played another direction and that worked out for you?
Yeah, what's funny is, the recreational players live and die by their picks every week. A lot of times I'm looking at games and I'm not even involved in because I'm looking to set up plays in the future or try to get a feel for teams. I mentioned that New England Patriot Miami Dolphin game last week. I didn't have anything in that game, but I kept a close eye on it because I really thought that was a turning point for the franchise of the Patriots, to be honest. Had they laid another egg against Miami last week, I was going to be very careful with them going forward. The team in college football last week for me in that same situation was Virginia Tech. After that blowout loss against Old Dominion as a 28-point road favorite, I really was curious to see how they would bounce back. I did not use anything in the Duke game because I just honestly didn't know if they would show up or not. Line went from 4 when we did the show on Friday, closed as high as 7 on Saturday, yet Tech still won easily outright. So I thought that was a good indication if you're looking to back Virginia Tech in the near future. I'm sure we'll talk about the Notre Dame game. It's a tough spot for them this week, but I think you can at least be confident that that team has not quit on the season.
So, Steve, tell me if this means anything. So I pick all the top 25 games. I add a few more relevant games in there. I'm picking 20 to 23 games, something in that range every week. I have noticed that there have been generally 4 or 5 straight up upsets against the money line every week. It's almost right on the line with 4 or 5 games. I think there was maybe only 3 or 4 last week, but right in that range of 3 to 5, 6 games against the money line. So I'm looking for those games now every week. I'm forcing myself to find 4 or 5 upsets. And last week I was disappointed that the line came down to 4.5 for Virginia Tech. It didn't much matter. I picked them straight up. I picked a number of upsets that I got right straight up by just making sure that I was looking for those 4 or 5 games. And now I'm 10-6 straight up picking upsets outright. So about 25% of the games is what I'm coming up with. Close to it are straight up upsets in college football, top 25 in the big games.
And not only that, if you look at it closer, I would say 60 to 70% of the time, the point spread does not matter when it's less than a touchdown, meaning that the favorite either wins by more than 7 or the underdog wins outright, as you're talking about it. I know in the NFL, about 70% of the time, underdogs of less than a touchdown, if they cover, they win outright. So very seldom does the spread come into play, even though these lines are extremely accurate, as we talk about, and very precise. For the most part, if you're taking an underdog of a touchdown or less in either college or pro football, you honestly have to feel they can win or should win the game outright because, in general, that is what has to happen.
All right, we'll jump in on Saturday's games. We get Clemson going on the road to Wake Forest. Wake Forest doesn't look to be nearly as strong as they've been the last couple of seasons. Clemson, of course, coming off that scare at home against Syracuse. Steve, we see lines move dramatically in the NFL when the great quarterbacks, Breeze, Rodgers, those guys go down or there's questions in play. Clemson has a quarterback situation. How much does that play into the line?
Yeah, no, I mean, they didn't look good last week either. They came from behind to beat Syracuse. Again, they probably should have lost outright. Really tough to handicap Clemson right now. I'd say it's worth several points in the line. And that's one of those uncertainty factors we talk about every week. The odds makers, the one advantage you get over the odds makers, they have to put a number up on every game, every 50-plus college football games, where you only have to pick maybe 3 or 4 of them if you really want to hone in and find an edge. Clemson's a team I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach with right now, and this will be a game I'm watching closely. And I talked about Virginia Tech last week. This could very well be one of those games I'm not involved in, yet I'm keeping a close eye on just to see how it sets up for future games.
Yeah, to Ohio State and Indiana going at it at 4 o'clock Eastern time as well. Hoosiers a 25.5-point dog based on the lines that I'm looking at right now with the Buckeyes. Your thoughts about where that may sway?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine Ohio State will be fully focused for this game. Come from behind, win against Penn State last week. If there's ever a letdown spot, it's this one. Question becomes, can Indiana do enough offensively to keep it close? Because, you're probably looking for the backdoor cover. But this would definitely be one of those weeks, at least from a scheduling perspective, where I probably would not want to be on Ohio State.
Yeah, we've got LSU and Florida, obviously a huge game in the SEC as Florida's lost just one game and LSU keeps their undefeated string going. They've got to travel to Gainesville. LSU doesn't score a ton of points. Obviously, they're a very talented team, but let's see, we're looking at about a -2, something in that range for LSU at this point on the road.
Yeah, I think you can make a case that the wrong team is favored here. I like Florida in this one. I really think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. They both have been very impressive over the past few weeks. The one difference and the reason why Florida's a home dog instead of probably a 3 or 4 point favorite is because they lost that game against Kentucky in week 2. But keep in mind, Kentucky's a perfect 5-0 straight up. They've played excellent football overall. That loss isn't a total fluke anymore. Florida, first-year coaching staff and only their second game. So I don't read too much into that. I like the fact Florida has looked good since, with some impressive recent wins. LSU, of course, has that nice win over Miami. We don't really know how impressive that is yet because Miami's been a double-digit favorite in every other game since. They play Florida State this weekend. Not sure we can learn much from that either. But the Auburn win, the win at Auburn is a 10-point dog, is why LSU is favored in this game. But otherwise, I think these two teams are pretty equal.
Staying in the SEC, it's interesting to note here, South Carolina is at home against Mizzou. South Carolina generally considered the second best team in the division starting the season. Kentucky continues their role. They beat the Gamecocks by 14 at home last week. We got Missouri at South Carolina. It looks as though South Carolina was a slim favorite, 1.5, something in that range to start the week. Mizzou's taken over and taken maybe a 1 or 2 point edge, according to the way it's swung now. And does the public draw into that? Are they swaying that because maybe South Carolina lost by 2 touchdowns last week and everybody's overreacting to that recent play?
Yeah, I think Jake Bentley being listed doubtful probably could have something to do with it as well. It's hard to know, with the injuries and how people read into things. I do think that loss at Kentucky last week was a bad loss. Only putting up 10 points, not impressive. They did have 4 turnovers, though. That had a large part to do with the 24-10 loss, was a 4-1 turnover deficit. Meanwhile, Missouri had a 3-1 turnover deficit against Georgia. They still lost by only 14. They've had the bye week also to get prepped for this game. So I think from a situational standpoint, it sets up well for Missouri. They also have the revenge motive from the 18-point home loss last year. So there's a few things setting up well for Missouri, even though coming into the season, I definitely thought South Carolina was the better team.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We sit down with Steve each and every Friday at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time. Open up the live chat for you to enter the discussion. I go through the games. If we've got time, we'll enter the live chat and see what you have as well. You can join Steve on prosportsinfo.com. Of course, check out my predictions as well. I'm not the expert. I just throw them out there. Was 17-6 against the spread. I'm pretty close to 57, 58% each and every year, something in that range against the spread. All right, let's see. We've got, the aforementioned Virginia Tech Notre Dame game, which Virginia Tech playing a little Jekyll and Hyde on us, but being very impressive on the road against Duke. I don't know if the numbers substantiate this, but there's that college football nation feel that Blacksburg at night means something. And, of course, Notre Dame has been a different offense since Ian Book took over.
Yeah, I mean, I do think on the surface, getting Virginia Tech as a full 7-point home underdog against anybody is pretty tempting. This will be a hostile environment. This line opened, by the way, at 4.5 earlier in the week. So there's been a good amount of money on Notre Dame. I think 4.5 was too low. My power ratings make the line about 7. So this is where it should be. I think if we do find 7.5 or higher by Saturday, especially by Saturday evening, they could become worth a look from a value perspective. The question for me, though, is can the quarterback play well again? You know, they've had the quarterback switch due to the injury. Notre Dame, of course, as you mentioned, also has had a quarterback switch. They have played well. We know that. Virginia Tech, a lot of uncertainty still. And their defense has been very mediocre this year. If you look at opponents played, I rate them as an average defense only. So I think the over could be worth a look here, 55.5. But once again, a lot of uncertainty with Virginia Tech at the quarterback spot and the defense. But catching a full 7 points as a home dog in Blacksburg is tempting.
Of course, the home road situation, a huge factor in various sites, lesser of a factor elsewhere. I see Michigan State in that 10-point range as a favorite against Northwestern. We saw that the Wildcats, you talk about a team that's all over the place. They can lose to Akron. They can take Michigan to the wire. Both of those games were at home. They travel to Michigan State. Michigan State underperforming thus far this year, but still they've only lost the one game.
Yeah, the Big Ten, I think, is pretty open. When you get out of the top two teams, really Michigan, Ohio State, and Wisconsin, I guess the top three, and then Penn State. So you really have four there. I think there's a lot of mediocrity in the middle of the pack, and we're going to see upsets. You know, you talked about these underdogs winning outright. I think that's something we're going to see a lot with these bottom Big Ten, middle and bottom Big Ten teams for the rest of the season. I take that approach with this game. Nobody really wants anything to do with Northwestern after 3 straight home losses. Their only win of the season, don't forget, was at Purdue in week 1. They lose 3 straight at home. Now they're on the road. Might actually be a good thing for the Wildcats, as they've obviously had no home field advantage so far.
Absolutely. And if you watch the games and see them in Evanston, they don't have a home field advantage in regards to people showing up to the games and causing any kind of noise. And that just stood out to me because I just think the way these two teams play and the quality of the two teams, sure, Michigan State's a better team, but man, 10 points jumps out to me in terms of Northwestern playing close games. We'll do our weekly Alabama look because it's 35 points and it's a conference game and it's Arkansas. And you would think it wouldn't be, but you don't know. I would have no idea where to lay the line on these games because Arkansas actually played better, but that was Texas A&M, and they're a decent team. But Alabama's just a different category, and it's almost like they just set the number themselves. We saw a backdoor cover by Louisiana last week, which burned me, but I wasn't surprised because who knows what's going on in the fourth quarter, and here we go again with 5 touchdowns.
Yeah, last year they were a 37-point home favorite. They only won that game by 32. So, you know, once again, same situation. They can win big but not cover. That's what's happened the last 2 weeks. Bama's actually now on a 2-game losing streak against the spread after covering the first 3 games. They won by 22 and 32, 42 point, 32, 22 and 42 point margins the 2 weeks. So it's not like they're not playing well. It's just these numbers are so big now. I think you could almost make a case on the road that they're a better play because you're probably laying 6 points less than you would if they're at home. You know, this line is 41 or 42 at home. It's a touchdown less on the road. Yet I still think they can steamroll Arkansas. Their backups are still probably better in the fourth quarter. So with the 2-game spread losing streak, maybe this is the time you step on to get Bama. Just difficult to handicap these games right now because we know they're going to win. It's just a question of how much they win by.
Steve Merrill joins us from Pro Sports Info. Join him right there. Check it out. He joins us and has for the last 2 college football seasons and great insight into the Vegas lines. And check out my predictions later today right here at Mark Rogers TV. All right. This is the fascinating team right here, Kentucky. Okay. They're a double-digit full 2-touchdown underdog at Florida. They win outright. They then take on Mississippi State at home. They're 9.5 or 10-point underdog. They win outright. Then South Carolina comes in. They're a 2-point underdog again. They win outright. I can only imagine what the spread would be on these games if they would have played the spread and lost by 2 touchdowns and lost by 10 and lost by a field goal. But now they're even after showing up those 3 times and one time on the road, they go to Texas A&M and they're the 6-point dog.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what Kentucky's done this season, it's legitimate. I mean, their numbers are very good on both sides of the ball. They're averaging 6.2 yards per play offensively. They're giving up just 4.4 yards per play defensively. They've outscored their opponents 32-12 on average. So it's not a fluke that they're 5-0. They deserve to be. They've actually been a better team than A&M this season. With that said, though, it's not always that easy when handicapping college football. I do think there's some line value now, as you mentioned. This line would have been much higher at the beginning of the season, probably double digits. And then on top of that, they're coming off 3 straight home games. This is only their 2nd true road game of the season. Now, yes, they won at Florida in week 2, but as I talked about earlier, that was a young Florida team, a new coaching staff. It's hard to read too much into that. First time they've traveled in a month now. I like the setup here for Texas A&M. I wish the line was a little bit lower. We'll see if maybe the public pushes it down by Saturday. But this does not look like a good situation for Kentucky, even though they've been playing excellent football.
You get the annual rivalry game with Oklahoma taking on Texas. Of course, they're in the Cotton Bowl. It's split down the middle in terms of the colors in the stadium. And this is an interesting one to me because I think the teams are closer than the point spread would indicate. But because Oklahoma is so explosive on offense, for example, last week, Baylor played them close. They were staying within 2 scores. It wasn't a tight game, but 2 scores. And then, the point spread's like 23. I got Oklahoma minus the 23, and I'm in good shape because they just put up so many points that in the last 10 minutes, they just throw up 3 more touchdowns, and there you go, 63-33. Well, it's not going to be that case with Texas, but, I can see a really good game, but it could still turn out to be 10 or 14 points at the end. And it's a 7-point Oklahoma favorite, according to Vegas right now.
Yeah, and this has always been a tight rival series. You always want to lean towards the underdog in these rivalry series, and that's definitely worked out the last 2 years. Texas has lost each of the past 2 seasons by exactly 5 points each time as an 11.5 and 8.5 underdog. Now they're about 7.5 point dog, but I think you can make a case they're a better team this season. I was big on Texas coming in this year. We did the preview show in the summer. I mentioned they were a sleeper for me. That loss against Maryland was devastating in week 1 from a national title perspective, but they have bounced back nicely. And they still control their own destiny in the Big 12 conference, and that's all you can ask for if you want to make that 14 playoff. I think they're a live dog here. I think the line is pretty much where it should be based on recent results, but I still think Texas could be flying a bit under the radar due to that week 1 loss, even though they've been covering and winning since.
And then we also have Florida State, Miami, speaking of rivalries, and I can't imagine that it's been a long time. I'm sure during the series we've seen recently Florida State is a big favorite because Miami's been down up until the last couple years. But Miami on the flip side now, the big favorite against Florida State, who's obviously been awful, but they finally break through and get a win against a marginal team in Louisville, but a road win, and they come back and they score 14 in the fourth quarter to get it done. But they're a 13.5 point dog at Miami.
Yeah, I mean, the 30-7 loss at Syracuse as a road favorite. It's not looking quite as bad now that Syracuse should have won at Clemson last week and played well. But still not a good showing. But even last week's win at Louisville, not really that impressive. They were a 5.5 point road favorite. They only won by 4. This is a Louisville team that got blown out against Virginia right before that. So not a good Louisville squad. Florida State is a team you just cannot trust right now until you see something on the field, and we haven't seen that yet. There's a lot of talent there, and I think at some point they do turn it around. It's just too much of a gamble for me to try to guess which week that's going to be until we see it actually happen.
Steve Merrill joins us from Pro Sports Info. Please check out what he's got there at prosportsinfo.com. And Steve, just to appease the folks that want to get started early this weekend, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Yellow Jackets, a 4.5 to 5 point favorite. And something sticks out about this game that you said last week. You've got the teams you can count on, and they're very few. Ohio State, Alabama, a couple more, Georgia. Then you've got the bottom rung. You've got like 75 teams to a certain extent to varying levels that you don't know who's going to show up that week. And these two would seem to be a classic matchup of that.
Yeah, whenever you have a small point spread, in general, if you can predict the team that's going to have the most rushing yards or a 2-to-1 edge in rushing yards, you're going to cover about 70% of the time. And pretty certain to say Georgia Tech's going to probably outrush Louisville almost a 2-to-1 margin in this game. And then you look at the setup as well. Not only does Louisville not have the bye week to prepare for the option, but they also have to play on a short week here. So I think the setup is good for Georgia Tech. These are two teams that have underperformed this year. They're both 1-4 against the point spread. They both had lost 4 straight to start the season until last week. They both covered. As I mentioned, though, Louisville barely covered against a Florida State team that was really struggling overall. I think the setup looks better for Georgia Tech. Even though it's a short week traveling, I actually think that works against the home team in this situation.
Got Steve Merrill on the line from Pro Sports Info, so we encourage you to jump over there to prosportsinfo.com. New Heisman odds out. Can't think of anything necessarily happening this season that's changed things dramatically, aside from Bryce Love underperforming, nowhere near the numbers that he had at this point last season. So where do we stand on those?
No, it's actually exactly the point. Bryce Love was the favorite in a lot of spots coming in this season, and he is not in the top 4 anymore. He's really off the board. We got all quarterbacks right now. 2 is as low as even money. And then you've got Haskins, also coming in there out of nowhere. Will Grier, the Virginia Tech West Virginia quarterback, he was in the mix when the season began. I'm seeing him 4th on the board right now. But Kyler Murray is at 3-1. Haskins is as low as 2-1 in some spots. Those are the guys that really have come out of nowhere and put themselves in the mix. So right now it's really a 4-horse race between Tua, Haskins, Murray, and Grier. And after that, Really nobody else less than 20-1. But it's early. You know, I'll never forget a few seasons ago, Andrew Luck was 1-100 in November, and he still did not win the Heisman the year that RG3 won it. So things can change. We still have several months to go.
And then there was a year when Geno Smith went 7-0, something in that range, and he had video game numbers, and everybody was on the Geno Smith train, and they lost 5 straight, and he started throwing picks left and right. Let's look at the national championship odds. Alabama, obviously, way out in front. Ohio State would seem to be a clear number 2, especially with Clemson showing some chinks in the armor.
Yeah, right now, Bama is less than even money. In fact, I've seen some sports books that allow you to take Alabama, or you could take the rest of the field. You could take every other team. And right now, you would have a 57% chance Bama wins. You'd have a 43% chance that any other team wins the national title, according to the betting odds. After that, you've got Ohio State around 5-1, Clemson at 6-1, Georgia at 7-1. So pretty clear cut right now who the odds makers think the top 4 are going to be. It's going to be Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. There's 4 more teams in that mix. Everybody else is 40-1 or higher. There's 4 other teams that are less than 40-1, and that's Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Michigan, and Washington. Notre Dame, obviously, if they win this Virginia Tech game this weekend, it really controls their own destiny. They have the advantage of not having to play in the ACC title game, even though they have an ACC-heavy schedule. That could work to their advantage. If they lose this Tech game, I think it's going to be a real uphill battle for them due to the fact they won't have that championship game to make up a big win. Washington, the only Pac-12 team, as I mentioned, they have a little bit of an easy schedule out there. And then you've got Oklahoma as the only Big 12 team right now that's in the mix. If they lose this Texas game, they're going to fall as well. So those are the top 8, the only 8 teams really in contention right now. But if Notre Dame or Oklahoma, either one of them loses this week, you're really going to be down about a 6-team playoff race. And then if Washington loses at some point, it's probably a 5-team race. So it's setting up pretty well right now for Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. Clemson with the quarterback situation, though, I think is the real X factor. I could see them being the team that maybe falters.
Definitely appreciate the folks in the live chat commenting. We've got a few questions in there, but we've got a number of comments as you guys take it away in regards to the live chat and talk it up for college football. Want to remind you, though, that Steve joins us every week at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time on Friday. We also cut a segment where Steve runs down the top 3 games of the week and also gives a sleeper pick. And we're going to cut that in just a few minutes and send that over to SG1 Sports. So in the next couple hours, go to SG1 Sports. You'll check out Steve's look at the top 3 games of the week as selected by me. So there's the opinion coming in there, and also a sleeper pick as well. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by, and we will, of course, talk soon.
Thanks, Mark.